At this point in the worst global pandemic of our lifetimes, it should not be necessary for me to do what I'm about to do, to state the clear facts about how uniquely devastating and deadly this disease is. But nevertheless, it is necessary because there is a loud propaganda arm of the president's supporters who are insistent on pumping people full of misinformation and whataboutism when it comes to this virus.
Now they say 60,000 people will die. 61,000 is what we lost to the flu in 2017 and 2018. The flu.
In 2018, 61,000 Americans died of the annual flu. That same year, more than 67,000 died from drug overdoses. Nearly 50,000 died from suicide.
Hundreds of thousands of Americans die every year from horrific things. Viruses, pneumonia, obviously old age, cancer, diabetes.
You know what kills more people every year than coronavirus? A lot more? Poverty. Poverty kills people in massive numbers. We should remember that.
Look, the fact of the matter is we have people dying. 45,000 people a year die from automobile accidents, 480,000 from cigarettes, 360,000 a year from swimming pools, but we don't shut the country down for that.
Remember any of those people running around after 9/11 saying, actually, you know, the flu kills 60,000 people a year. So, I mean, no, of course not. Coronavirus is not the flu. It's not cigarettes. It's not automobile accidents. It's not swimming pools. They're using these arguments that it is not that dangerous to say that, on balance, we should open the economy back up and just accept those deaths. But what would that look like if they were got their way? If we just said, screw it, we're Americans, we're braving the virus. Well, look at the NYPD. They, of course, had to keep officers out on the streets, couldn't shelter in place. They ended up with 20% of the uniform workforce out sick. Or perhaps the purest example of just maintaining the status quo, a meat processing facility in South Dakota, which kept up production, employees working shoulder to shoulder, day in, day out. It is now the single biggest hotspot of coronavirus cases in the country. Or you can look outside the U.S. in Sweden, where they did not lock down. Schools remain open, and now their death toll is significantly higher than their neighbors. In fact, look at this graph of coronavirus deaths in European countries. That purple line, the one going straight up, yes, that is Sweden. This virus is deadly, and it is really gross and disingenuous and heartless and dangerous to portray it any differently. Look at this chart. All right, these are average weekly fatalities in the U.S. from different causes. This line in blue is what flu season looked like over 2017 to 2018 season. That's a bad fatalities, right? Kills a lot of people. Now in yellow, here is flu plus pneumonia over the same period of time. Again, that kills a lot of folks. Obviously very deadly and dangerous. Now let's add heart disease up at the top there in orange. Much more deadly, okay? One of the top killers in our country. Here is cancer in green. Again, almost as deadly. Now, here's what the coronavirus looks like in red. Yeah. In just a matter of weeks, it has become almost the leading cause of death among Americans. And it is shooting straight up because it is contagious. Swimming pools are not contagious, nor are auto accidents. It's not the flu. It's not smoking. It's not auto accidents. It's not swimming pools. And it's not just here. Look at this data from England and Wales. Follows the exact same pattern. In blue, you see the spectrum of mortality from all causes for each week since 2010. And the red line in 2020, what is that? Well, that obviously is coronavirus. Keep in mind, in the US and UK, these are countries that are basically fully locked down, and that's what it's doing. And in the epicenter, New York City, the place where the virus has spread the most and the fastest, well, it's killed about 1 out of every 700 New Yorkers. On a typical day in April, about 150 New Yorkers die. On the worst day, April 7th, 519 New Yorkers died. More New Yorkers died that week, the week before Easter, than on 9/11. The people on Trump TV don't really seem to care that much about a weekly 9/11 when there's an economy to get running. And whatever certain people want to do with the facts themselves, however sociopathically heartless and cruel they want to be, however much they want to admit that they just don't care that much about this devastating, overwhelming loss, let's be clear about the magnitude of what is actually happening.